Do you want to witness one of the most explosive showdowns ever? Picture Talia Moore, a near-mythical Delta Force operative, locked in a life-or-death struggle against Beck Montoya amid blazing flames and collapsing steel beams. Their final clash sends shockwaves through the entire criminal underworld, and that's just a glimpse of the heart-stopping action. In this extended story, you'll uncover the secrets behind Talia's lethal skills, the harrowing fate of innocent captives, and the true reach of a sinister syndicate lurking in the shadows. Ready to plunge into the twists and turns of this epic tale? Make sure to listen through to the very end. You don't want to miss how it all concludes. And if you enjoy gripping stories packed with danger and heroism, remember to subscribe to our channel for more pulse-pounding adventures. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling and helps us bring you even more incredible sagas. Talia Moore sat on the curb in the grimy heart of Eastfall, a sprawling city known for its ceaseless rains and the cold indifference of its inhabitants. In the half-light of a flickering street lamp, she looked like just another drifter on the streets, shoulders slumped, clothing worn to threads, and eyes obscured by the tangle of her hood. Passers-by glanced at her, then turned away with the same hurried apathy they showed to anyone else forced to sleep in doorways. The city streets were slick from a recent downpour, reflecting the neon signs of a late-night diner across the road, its bright pink and green lettering flickering ominously in the puddles. Cars hissed by, kicking up sprays of water and trash, but Talia barely moved when stray droplets soaked her ragged coat. She didn't care about the stench of stale rain or the worn soles of her battered boots. The city's disregard for people like her made it the perfect hiding place, a cloak that let her move unseen in the urban sprawl. Yet underneath that battered exterior lay something no stranger would guess. Talia Moore had once been the most lethal operative in an elite Delta Force unit. Her posture, though seemingly weary, revealed a coiled tension if one knew what to look for. She positioned herself at the perfect vantage to observe everything within a block's radius, adjusting only slightly to keep an eye on pedestrians and vehicles. Each subtle movement was deliberate, honed through years of training in environments far more treacherous than any back alley in Eastfall. Once upon a time, Talia had worn a uniform with pride, leading covert missions in hostile territories. Records of her deeds had, however, been erased in a series of clandestine cover-ups so thorough that even her name appeared on no official rosters. She was a phantom the government no longer acknowledged, a ghost who wandered the back alleys of an uncaring metropolis. That night, the damp cold seeped into her bones, aggravating old injuries that never fully healed. She could recall a painful mission in the jungles of an unnamed country, the humidity there so thick it felt like drowning with each breath. Memories of dusty roads in war-torn regions flickered through her mind, desert heat scorching her face as she navigated landmines and ambushes. Hardly anyone suspected that a woman dozing by a diner in a tattered coat had once outsmarted, outrun, and outgunned entire squads of insurgents. She had left behind that life, or perhaps that life had left her behind. Either way, she was consigned to the shadows because her continued survival depended on secrecy. Tonight, she was not simply loafing around in the drizzle. A faint tremor in her jaw and the sharp vigilance behind her half-closed lids suggested she was waiting for something, or perhaps for someone. It wasn't random that she chose this particular corner, near a rundown diner that stayed open all night. Under the soft buzz of neon signage, drug dealers occasionally approached unwary patrons. Lone officers sometimes harassed the homeless, and desperate souls sought quick respite in a cup of stale coffee. Talia liked vantage points where the flow of human traffic was predictable, yet overlooked by the city's indifferent throng. The perfect camouflage. But not everyone would walk by without noticing her. Sooner or later, someone was bound to disrupt this fragile peace. Perhaps an overzealous patrol or a curious local hoping to rid the neighborhood of what they saw as street trash. Talia had been stalked by minor threats before. Petty thieves, small-time criminals convinced she was an easy target. She usually let them walk away with a warning or a quick lesson in humility. However, on this particular night, things would unfold in a way even she couldn't fully anticipate. Eastfall's gloom would soon transform into the spark of a far-reaching chain of events. Events that would bring Talia's formidable skills out of the darkness in which she had concealed them for so long. The night deepened, and the rain turned into a steady drizzle that gleamed under the neon lights. Water pooled in potholes, rippling with each passing car. Talia kept her hood pulled low, tapping her fingers lightly against the curb in a rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. She heard distant sirens, a normal sound in this part of the city, yet something in the cadence tonight felt off. It was as though the city itself was giving her a warning she couldn't fully decipher. She sat motionless, scanning the reflective surfaces of storefronts across the street and the black window of a vacant laundromat. In those glimmers, she caught sight of a police cruiser rolling down the road with deliberate slowness. A moment later, the vehicle pulled to a stop not far from the diner, and four uniformed figures emerged. She recognized their body language instantly. They weren't responding to a call with urgency or dealing with an immediate threat. Instead, there was an air of casual superiority about them, underpinned by the sort of reckless confidence that certain officers wore like a second skin. The leader of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a rigid stance and a perpetual scowl. Sergeant Stephen Ards. His name was emblazoned on his badge and also etched into Talia's memory. Rumor around the streets labeled him as someone who enjoyed throwing his weight around when the cameras were off. Talia had seen the type many times. The overbearing posture, the restless grip on his baton. He was practically screaming for a confrontation. His three subordinates fanned out behind him. One was wiry and fidgety, perhaps new on the force but too eager to prove himself. Another, a woman with her hair tightly pulled back, maintained a closed-off expression that gave little away. The last was a stocky man whose eyes flickered with a sort of cruel humor, like he secretly relished the idea of scaring vulnerable people. They congregated in front of Talia, forming a loose semicircle. "Well, look here," Sergeant Ards announced, voice raised to be heard over the rain. "Another lost cause on our sidewalks. Shouldn't you be in a shelter somewhere?" His words dripped contempt, but Talia caught the slight grin tugging at the corner of his lips. A grin that told her this was not genuine concern, but a prelude to humiliation. Talia said nothing, watching him with an impassive gaze. She sized him up, police belt weighed down by a service pistol, baton, flashlight, and cuffs. She imagined how swiftly she could strip him of those tools if push came to shove. Her Delta Force instincts told her it would take less than 5 seconds to incapacitate him. Yet she remained perfectly still, hoping to avoid the trouble that Ards was so clearly inviting. One of his subordinates, the wiry officer, snickered. "Hey, Sarge, notice her jacket? It's got a patch that looks military." He leaned closer, squinting at the worn fabric. "Think she's legit or one of those fakes who scrounge for sympathy bucks?" Ards took a step nearer, hooking his thumbs into his belt loops. "Yeah, you got dog tags, soldier." His tone dripped with condescension. He expected Talia to either cower or lash out. Sometimes brutes like Ards needed only the slightest provocation to pounce. Talia remained silent, her pulse steady. She recognized that any sudden movement might escalate the situation. She also knew that while she could defend herself handily, the resulting chaos would draw too much attention. Her anonymity was her shield, and she had no wish to blow it for a petty showdown with a few small-time bullies. Still, the tension in her muscles coiled. She would respond if forced. Ards noticed her calm indifference and seemed insulted by it. He sneered, tapping his baton against his palm. Perhaps in his mind, he was dealing with another helpless vagrant who could be shoved around for entertainment. When she remained unresponsive, Ards' frustration grew. "Let's see some ID," he barked, stepping close enough for Talia to smell stale coffee on his breath. "Or are you one of those lying panhandlers?" She met his gaze, her own eyes revealing a flicker of something unreadable. Something that should have warned him off. But Ards was too caught up in his own bravado. As the drizzle intensified and pooled around their feet, Talia braced herself for the oncoming storm, not of weather, but of conflict. She'd been around bullies like him before, and they always mistook silence for weakness. Tonight, that miscalculation would spin the night into directions none of them could guess. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled faintly across the sky, underscoring the rising tension. Talia tried a final measure of restraint. She opened her mouth, hoping a few well-chosen words might diffuse the situation. "I don't carry ID," she said evenly, choosing each syllable with deliberate calm. "I'm no threat to you." Her voice only seemed to spur Ards on. No ID, huh? Vagrancy is a chargeable offense around here. Looks like we got ourselves a real heroine, guys. His baton tapped rhythmically against his palm, a silent threat. The wiry officer, taking his cue from Ards, snickered again and circled behind Talia, as if they intended to box her in. An uneasy shuffle ran through the female officer's stance. Talia noted it in her peripheral vision. Perhaps not all of them relished this. Sometimes group psychology took over, and a single dissenting voice was drowned out by the others. But no one spoke up to de-escalate. The group smelled blood, or at least the opportunity to make their night more entertaining at Talia's expense. Ard stepped closer, waving his baton near her face. Get up. Now, put your hands where I can see them. Let's see just how tough you are when you're standing, and we're all looking you in the eye. Talia slowly rose, not wanting to appear confrontational, but also unwilling to let herself be cornered. She was dwarfed by Ards's bulky figure, yet there was a fluid assurance in her stance. A lesser observer might think she was nervous or shaky, but in reality she was centering her balance, adjusting her posture for optimal defense. Her breathing slowed, her gaze flicked to each officer in turn, tracking their positions. I don't want trouble, she said, voice low and steady, but Ards was already reaching for her, determined to enforce his will. He grabbed the sleeve of her coat with a meaty hand, yanking her forward. The moment he did, Talia's survival reflexes kicked in. The next few seconds happened so quickly, the other officers barely registered the movement. Talia twisted her arm free in a practiced maneuver, pivoting on the ball of her foot to clamp her hand around Ards's wrist. Leveraging momentum, she torqued his arm behind his back, forcing him to drop to one knee with a startled yelp. The baton clattered onto the wet asphalt. Ards grimaced, a flicker of shock replacing his arrogant smirk. The other three officers jolted into motion. The wiry man scrambled for his sidearm, the stocky one yelled an expletive, and the female officer took a step back, her eyes wide. For an instant, Talia had Ards under control, her grip precise enough that a single additional movement could break his elbow. But she released him almost as quickly as she had subdued him. Her intention was not to maim, it was to signal that she was no easy victim. She stepped back to create distance. Rain dripped from her hood, trailing down the sharp angles of her jaw. The stocky officer fumbled with his holster, and the wiry one finally freed his weapon, pointing it with unsteady hands. Thunder rolled again, louder this time. The atmosphere was electric. Ards got up slowly, massaging his wrenched arm with visible anger. His eyes blazed with humiliation. A mere second or two had upended the entire power dynamic, and he couldn't let it stand. You're gonna regret that, he snarled, retrieving his baton from the ground. Before Talia could brace herself, he lashed out, adrenaline fueling his swing. The baton slammed into the side of her head, stunning her and sending flashes of white pain across her vision. She fell hard, knees hitting the drenched pavement. Blood pounded in her ears and a sickening dizziness took hold. Dimly, she heard shouts from the other officers, but their words blurred into white noise as darkness crept into her peripheral vision. When Talia came to, the hum of fluorescent lights replaced the roar of rain. She was seated in a dim interrogation room that reeked of stale coffee and the faint odor of sweat. Her wrists were encased in heavy metal handcuffs, tethered to a loop on the metal table. Across from her sat Sergeant Ards, sporting a bruise on his cheek from where she had twisted him to the ground. He stared at her with a combination of anger and something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. He didn't understand how a scrawny, seemingly homeless woman had managed to outmaneuver him in front of his team. For a bully like Ards, that was personal humiliation. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, slapping a folder onto the table with theatrical force. Talia glanced at the folder, which looked mostly empty, a few sheets of paper inside. Likely they had tried to run her fingerprints, only to come up blank. She said nothing, content to let silence be her shield. Ards's jaw tightened. He had expected fear, groveling, or at least defiance. Instead, he was confronted by Talia's unsettling calm. With a low growl, he threw open the folder. "Your prints don't match anything in our system. No ID, no record with any shelter in town. You're a ghost. That means you must be lying about whatever your background is. We're prepared to charge you with assault on an officer. That's serious time, lady." Talia's head still throbbed from the blow, and she could feel dried blood matted in her hair near the temple, poorly cleaned by whoever had given her a cursory bandage. Yet she kept her expression impassive, forcing her senses to remain alert. She had lived through far worse interrogations. A small-town precinct was child's play compared to black site facility debriefings or field arrests in hostile countries. "You're making a mistake," she said at last, her voice hoarse. She wasn't sure if she meant it as a warning to him or a statement of fact. Ard's eyes narrowed. Before he could reply, a soft knock interrupted them. Another officer, a young man with sweaty palms and a nervous twitch, stuck his head in. "Sarge, phone for you. Some official from the Department of Defense is on the line. They're insistent." Confusion flickered across Ard's face, quickly turning to anger. "Department of Defense? That's not possible. You sure it's not a prank?" The young officer just shrugged helplessly, adding that the voice on the phone sounded extremely authoritative. With a menacing grunt, Ard stomped out of the room, leaving Talia alone with her thoughts. Minutes later, she heard shouting in the hallway. Ard's voice escalated, responding to a calmer but firmer tone from whoever was on the phone. Though she couldn't make out every word, phrases like, "She can't just walk," and "Who does she work for?" cut through the muffled barrier. After a few more heated exchanges, Ard stormed back into the room, face flushed. His pride was clearly wounded even more deeply now. "Release her," he barked to the officer standing guard. "No charges, no record of this. Nothing. That's an order." A hush fell over the room as the officer hastily unlocked Talia's cuffs, letting them drop onto the table. Ard's leaned in close, his voice low with venom. "Your friends in high places might have saved you tonight, but I'll find out who you really are. Next time you won't get off so easy." Talia didn't bother responding. She simply rose from the chair, rubbing at the red marks on her wrists. Without a backward glance, she walked out of the interrogation room, leaving Ard simmering behind her. Outside, the drizzle had lightened to a mist. She stepped onto the wet pavement, her head still throbbing. The city lights felt harsher, and the swirl of residual adrenaline made her shaky. Normally, Talia would have vanished into the night like a wraith, seeking a new hiding spot. But the moment she stepped off the station's threshold, she sensed someone watching her from the edge of the lampost's glow. A tall figure in a dark, tailored suit emerged from the shadow cast by the flickering streetlight. He raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression, revealing a neatly pressed shirt cuff peeking out from under his jacket. Talia froze, tension gripping her anew. She was in no mood for yet another confrontation, especially with someone who might be more than just a nosy passerby. "Miss Moore," he said calmly, voice subdued yet carrying a certain confidence. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm with the FBI." He moved slowly, pulling a leather badge holder from his inner pocket so she could see the glint of the federal seal under the street lamp. "I was inside the precinct on an unrelated matter. Heard a commotion about an unidentified woman with unusual combat skills. I had a hunch it might be someone special." Talia regarded him through narrowed eyes. She had no reason to trust any law enforcement figure, let alone a federal agent. Her experiences taught her that power structures often turned a blind eye to corruption. For all she knew, Caldwell might be just another cog in a broken system. "You have the wrong person," she muttered, turning to walk away. She had no interest in revealing anything more than she already had. He didn't try to grab her, which was a point in his favor. "I know about Lionel Greer," Caldwell said, his voice carrying enough volume to catch her attention. Talia stopped in her tracks, shoulders stiffening. Lionel Greer was a name that circulated in the underworld, a rumored arms dealer and trafficker whose reach extended well beyond Eastfall. She'd heard the rumor that he sold weapons to rogue paramilitary groups and was also knee-deep in human trafficking. Once upon a time, Talia had caught wind of him through her old channels. That Caldwell even knew Greer's name suggested he might have real intel. She turned slightly, half-facing him, ready to slip into the shadows if needed. "What do you want from me?" she asked tersely. Caldwell stepped a little closer, keeping his posture unthreatening. "I'm building a case against Greer. We believe he's not just trading arms, but also overseeing a vast human trafficking operation along the harbor. Each time we try to pin him down, he disappears behind layers of shell companies and corrupt officials. We need someone who can operate outside the usual channels, a specialist who can move in the shadows. His eyes flicked to the bandage on Talia's head. From the looks of what happened tonight, you might be exactly that type of person. She noted how he spoke, free of condescension or arrogance. His approach was measured, as if he anticipated her skepticism. "And you think I'm going to help you because?" she asked, trailing off. Her voice held a challenge. She had severed ties with officialdom a long time ago. Caldwell let out a slow breath. "Look, I know how messed up the system is. I know that the police letting you go so easily means someone very high up owes you or is protecting you. But I also know how dangerous Greer is. If you've got personal reasons to see him taken down, I can offer resources, intel, some measure of cover. But we'll keep it off the books. That's the only way to avoid half the city's corrupt power brokers tipping him off." Talia scanned the empty street, recalling how the Department of Defense had intervened on her behalf. She didn't know who had pulled strings for her this time. Maybe some old ally or a favor called in by one of her few remaining contacts. But Caldwell's approach seemed different than the usual bureaucrat. An uneasy truce formed in her mind. Lionel Greer was indeed a plague on the city, and though Talia's motivations were her own, she recognized that having an FBI agent with at least some genuine desire to stop Greer might be beneficial. "All right," she said at last, voice still guarded. "I'm not promising you anything, but if you dig up a way to corner Greer, I want to know." Caldwell nodded, as if he'd half expected her reluctance. "There's something brewing at the harbor. He's scheduling shipments of certain products. I'm going to keep digging. If you find anything on your end, I want us to share intel. We won't get many shots at Greer." Talia stared at him for a moment before turning away, ignoring the swirl of misty rain that began anew. "Find me when you're ready," she said over her shoulder. And with that, she vanished into the labyrinth of the streets, leaving Caldwell alone under the sputtering glow of the streetlight. Behind them, the precinct's windows flickered, revealing silhouettes of officers moving about, unaware that the city's underworld was about to be rocked by forces they barely comprehended. Hours before dawn, Lionel Greer stood behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, high above East Fall's skyline. The rain hadn't stopped, and rivulets of water streamed down the glass, distorting the view of the sprawling harbor in the distance. Greer was a tall man with impeccably styled salt and pepper hair and the bearing of a seasoned magnate. He wore a tailored navy suit, and a single gold watch flashed on his wrist under the subdued lighting of his luxury suite. Anyone meeting him for the first time might mistake him for a legitimate businessman, perhaps a philanthropist. Only a closer look at his hawkish eyes revealed the ruthlessness beneath. He dialed a number on his phone, eyes never leaving the endless city lights. On the other end of the line, a crisp female voice answered. "Mr. Greer," said the voice belonging to his personal assistant, Ava Riddell. "Your associates at the docks have concluded their nighttime shipments. No delays reported." Muddish Greer allowed a hint of satisfaction to twitch at the corners of his mouth. "Good. And the local authorities? Still on our payroll?" "Yes, sir. Commissioner Dale has assured us that any investigative eyes on the harbor will be limited. However, there was an odd incident tonight involving some police officers and a homeless woman. I checked the station logs after a tip from our contact. A few flags were raised regarding the Department of Defense stepping in." The mention of the Department of Defense made Greer's lips press into a thin line. His mind immediately went to old rumors, black ops, sealed records, and specialized agents who roamed off the grid. He'd spent years crafting an impenetrable network of corrupt officials, gang enforcers, and even high-level legal experts who laundered money for his operations. But what if some unpredictable ghost slipped through? He'd faced that possibility in the past. A mission in a foreign country that cost him a small fortune and half of his best men, all undone by a single specter of a soldier, rumored to be unstoppable. "Any identification on this woman?" he asked, forcing an even tone. He didn't want to betray the unease rattling inside him. If it was the same operative from years ago, he needed to act decisively. "Not official, but her name popped up in certain watch lists we maintain. She goes by Talia Moore, potentially ex-military. The details are murky, sealed behind clearance walls we can't breach," Ava reported. "She was released without charges after the Department of Defense intervened. That's never a good sign." Greer's grip tightened on the phone. He recalled rumors of an elite soldier rumored to have disrupted entire smuggling rings single-handedly. He had never confirmed it was Talia Moore by name, but a sense of recognition churned in his gut. "Keep me updated," he said curtly, "and arrange a meeting with Beck Montoya. I want him here tonight." Beck Montoya, an ex-Delta Force operative gone rogue, had been on Greer's payroll for a while. Montoya specialized in the kind of black market soldiering that cost a premium. He was as cunning as he was lethal, exactly the kind of person Greer relied on to eliminate threats that slipped through the usual cracks. Montoya was also rumored to have personal knowledge of certain ghosts from the specialized units he once served with. If Moore was the same phantom overshadowing Greer's nightmares, Montoya might be the only one capable of taking her out. After ending the call, Greer walked to a sleek bar in the corner of his penthouse. He poured himself a short glass of bourbon and sipped it slowly. The liquor burned his throat, but it steadied him, reminding him of the empire he'd built. The cargo ships at the harbor filled with illegal arms and human lives, the labyrinth of safe houses dotted across the city, and the politicians who owed him so many favors, they were effectively under his thumb. He had conquered every obstacle so far with a blend of strategic bribery, intimidation, and calculated violence. However, the mere possibility that Talia Moore was loose in Eastfall unsettled him in a way he detested. The recollection of a certain fiasco in South America years ago churned in his memory like a half-forgotten nightmare. He'd lost more men there than in any other operation, and if Moore had indeed survived, it meant his old ghosts were coming back to haunt him. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the polished floors of his penthouse with stark clarity. Greer made a silent vow. If Talia Moore had come to Eastfall, he would not underestimate her this time. The question remained, would even Beck Montoya's lethal skill set be enough to stop someone rumored to be unstoppable? Beck Montoya strode into Greer's penthouse later that night with the casual air of a man who'd seen far more lethal battlegrounds. He wore black tactical pants and a dark leather jacket, the faint smell of gun smoke clinging to him. A jagged scar on his right cheek hinted at past violence. Greer studied Montoya from across the marble floor, appreciating the controlled menace that radiated off him. Montoya was big but not bulky. Instead, he moved with a panther-like grace that always set others on edge. Ava guided Montoya to the private lounge area, where Greer waited with fresh drinks. Montoya declined the offered glass, his gaze scanning the opulent decor with mild disinterest. "You summoned me, Greer," he said, getting to the point. "I assume it's urgent since you had your assistant call at 3 in the morning?" Greer set his own drink down. "Talia Moore," he said simply. "I need to know if it's the same operative rumored to have demolished one of my biggest operations years ago. The details are fuzzy, but she's shown up on my radar again." Montoya's expression sharpened. "Moore? That name isn't common. If it's who I think it is, you've got a serious problem." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When we were in Delta, there were legends about her. Ghost warfare, infiltration, high-value target elimination. If she's here and has eyes on you, you're in more danger than you realize." Greer nodded, steepling his fingers. "That's precisely why I brought you in. I want you to find her, flush her out, and eliminate the threat. Money is no object, but keep it quiet, or we'll have bigger fish than the FBI breathing down our necks." Montoya's scar twitched with a subtle grimace. "Be careful what you wish for, Greer. Moore's not an amateur. She won't be easy to corner. If you want to beat her, you'd better let me handle it my way. No micromanagement, no interference." Greer inclined his head. "Understood. I'll funnel you whatever intel I have, but keep me posted on the major developments. The FBI is sniffing around, but they're so tangled in corruption and red tape, they can't make a move without telegraphing it. Moore isn't shackled by that." Montoya smirked. "I assume you have eyes on the harbor and certain shipments that are critical to your bottom line. She'll probably hit you where it hurts most." Greer didn't respond directly. They both knew the conversation was about more than just weapons or contraband. Rumor had it that Greer's real money came from trafficking human beings. Desperate men, women, and even children shipped into the country under false pretenses. The harbor was central to that trade, and Moore's sense of lethal moral justice would drive her straight to it if she discovered what was happening there. A cold tension filled the luxurious penthouse. Montoya rose, slipping a black baseball cap onto his head. "I'll begin at dawn. Keep your phone close." With that, he turned and strode out, never once glancing back at Greer. Greer let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Montoya was the best weapon in his arsenal, a living embodiment of the lethal training the U.S. military once provided. If anyone could stand toe-to-toe with Talia Moore, it was Beck Montoya. And yet, in the back of his mind, a flicker of doubt remained. He recalled the whispered legends of Moore's unstoppable ferocity. He couldn't afford to let that doubt paralyze him. One mistake, and the empire he had so meticulously built would go up in flames. As he walked to the window again, nursing a fresh pour of bourbon, Greer stared out at the city lights. In the far distance, he could see the red beacons marking the harbor's tallest cranes. If Moore was indeed a ghost from his past, he would either bury her in the depths of the ocean or watch his own kingdom burn around him. The choice, he feared, might not be his alone to make. In a deserted warehouse near the outskirts of Eastfall, Talia Moore set up a makeshift camp. She had quietly slipped into the building, which was half collapsed from years of disuse, with broken windows that allowed the wind to whistle through jagged panes of glass. Amidst the rubble, she found a secure corner blocked off by a tangle of rusted shelving units. It was perfect, out of sight from anyone who might wander in, but with enough vantage points to watch the entrance.